Train operators of Reddit, what's the weirdest, creepiest thing you've seen on the tracks? I'm an engineer now, but as a conductor, I was walking my train one midnight lacing air hoses, getting the car's freight ready to pull. I noticed what I thought was a dog or coyote about 100 yards away. No big deal. I have a big aluminum and steel stick with a hook for cranking brakes without having to climb onto the cars. Then I noticed it kind of tracing along, pacing me. I could see the glow of its eyes watching me. Later, as we're ready to depart, I'm out in front of the engine, opening the track switch to get onto the main line. I'm in the engine's headlights, and I hear my engineer say quietly over the radio, calmly walk up to the engine. If I blow the whistle, run. I'm thinking, oh geez, it's just that coyote, no big deal. And I keep working, but he starts flashing the cab lights, so I think maybe there's a manager stalking us. So I go up there. He has me close the nose door and points out a giant mountain lion perched up on a berm 20 feet from where I was, casually sprawled out staring dead at us. This was northern Iowa, so pretty uncommon. That and a bunch of addict and drunks around the yards. Story 2, 1:30 a.m. in Riverside, California. A very clearly drunk man squares off against my train and then opens his arms like he is accepting what is about to happen. Fell over and got out of the way just before we hit him. Thankfully, I have never hit someone yet, but that was the closest I have ever come. It's not the hit or the recovery, it's the nightmares months later. Story 3. Saw a body wearing a thick coat in the middle of the tracks. We put the train in emergency, but we didn't stop in time. The conductor got out to see if the person was still alive, and it wasn't a person at all. Someone put a ducking coat on a deer carcass and put it between the rails. Weirdest crap ever. Story 4. Not an engineer, but worked at a bowling alley that the tracks through town ran directly behind. One of my nightly jobs was emptying trash. The dumpster was right across from the tracks. Started hearing the train coming and the engineer was on the horn. Suddenly, there was a very loud crunch and brakes being hit. A few moments later, I see a destroyed car being pushed by the train, and I could very plainly see a woman crunched in the car. Evidently, the crossing arms failed and the driver didn't stop. I had nightmares for a few years after that. Story 5. Lived next to tracks. Big Rig tried to rush across the tracks to avoid waiting. The trucker was fine as the train ran right through the middle of the trailer. It was filled with those 10-cent paper folders. Looked like a Skittles commercial. Rainbow explosion. Story 6. Not a train operator, but was riding the train through San Jose, California, and there were bodies on the tracks. The operators assumed they were murdered and left there in relation to gang violence. Story 7. I used to do modifications for trains and rewires and then test them and drive them about a mile to terminal that took them and drove them back to where they needed to go. Most of the time we would walk back after dropping them off since we were hourly and had a private track until where we dropped it off, so there wasn't danger of getting ran over. On the way back, there was a big puddle with a decent-sized fish swimming in it. There wasn't a lake anywhere on the property, and it never flooded for one to swim there. Me and the guy I worked with figured a bird must have dropped it there, or someone put it there, because we couldn't imagine any other way it got there. Story 8. I was a young transportation supervisor trainee for a railroad. It was my first month in intercity Detroit. It was about 3 a.m. and I had to help inspect a train that was having trouble moving. It was winter and the brakes wouldn't release. The guy I was training with dropped me off at one end of the train and I started walking towards the locomotives. About 20 cars into the train, I started hearing footsteps on the other side. I would turn my lantern off and wait a few seconds and they would stop. This repeated for about 10 minutes as I walked towards the locomotives. It eventually stopped when I met up part of the train crew. I'm sure it was nothing, probably a coyote or stray dog, but I was freaked out. Story 9. Obligatory, not a locomotive engineer, but work in the railroad industry. As a lot of people have already said, usually the worst are the fatalities. Most gruesome, a person dressed in all black laid with his neck on the rail to ensure that the job would be done. Body was easy to find, head was not. Most bizarre, a prize Weimaraner dog that was off-leash ran in front of a train and was hit. EMS was called because we thought the dog walker was hit as well. Turns out he was just hysterical because he was convinced the dog, which wasn't even his, wanted to pass because his sister from the same litter had just passed away a few days before. Random, birds get hit and get stuck. Removed a giant turkey buzzard from the locomotive and walked away. When I returned about 15 minutes later, the corpse was gone. Story 10. Okay, so I used to be a driver who was a third-party contractor who picked up and dropped off engineers/conductors when they timed out. Sometimes they would time out at the most inconvenient locations, and I would have to go pick them up, and a coworker in a different city would drop off a replacement. Well, I received a call at 8 p.m. that I was going to pick someone up at 11 p.m. at a location in the Sierra Mountain. On my way, I was cruising down the main freeway, exited off of a junction onto a two-way highway. Using the Google Maps, my location I typed was not on a main road. Stress kicked in as I was going to have to take a dirt road in the mountains with fading cell phone service and would have to navigate in the dark. My radio worked and was the best line of communication to the train. Well, as I was traveling down a dirt road at 10:30 at night, something hit the top of my vehicle. I slowed down, locking my doors, and stopped. What the heck was that? I looked around and saw nothing. The road I was on had dense trees, a foot of clearance on each side of the vehicle, and the path didn't seem to be traveled much as plants were growing in the middle of the road path. I decided to crawl over my seats to look at the back, as no way in hell am I opening the doors. Nothing. I pause and stare quietly, waiting to see if anything moves. My radio was on and the conductor asked if I was on the line or there. I quickly realized it was the locomotive I was going to meet. I responded that I was on the way and on the dirt road heading toward them. They quickly responded with, "You made sure you took the first right off the two-way highway, right?" I stated yes. He then stated, "But you kept going." I stated yes. Now I'm frustrated because I'm thinking I traveled more than I needed to. Then, out of the corner of my eye, on the driver's side window, two big-ass eyes reflecting light from my headlights are deadlocked on me. Oh crap. As my heart drops, adrenaline hit me, but I have no idea if it sees me through the tinted windows. I don't dare move. The eyes were large and seemed to be tracking after staring for a moment, which seemed like at me. The scary part was, I never saw what it was. The eyes were spaced and looking forward enough to be a bear, but moved as though it was much taller in smooth motion, as if they were floating. When the animal moved, I could hear it pushing through all of the foliage. When the eyes disappear, I pulled forward to a point I could turn around, maybe a football field length away, and noticed as I was turning around there were train tracks. The guy on the radio said stay there as they could see me. Well, short ending, the engineers hopped in, and on the way home, we're talking about how they saw a large animal that looked like the size of a bear that stood in front of their tracks as they were slowly coming to a stop but took off much too fast to be a bear. And they even joked that it ran away on two legs at that speed. They said exactly where I saw the creature, and shivers to this day still happen when I think about it. Story 11. Okay, so this might get buried or ignored because it's only kind of on topic, but hear me out. I live very close to the tracks. I love the sound of a train in the distance and the steady growing and shrinking thunk of the tracks. But I'm freaked out by the thought of the local tracks. There's two ways to get to the main road. A slightly longer route that has a bridge for cars that the train tracks pass under, and a slightly shorter route that directly crosses the tracks. I call it the crossroad. I refuse to drive it anytime past broad daylight. For some context, the area along the crossroad is residential up until about 200 feet from the crossing. After that, there's a crumbling building and an overgrown field on one side and an overgrown deserted lot on the other side. It's a small one-lane road with barely enough passing room, so all the growth makes it extremely hard to maneuver. The rotting building is only a couple feet off the road, so if you're stopped waiting for the train on that side, you're stuck almost in arm's reach of dark abandoned windows. On the field side, not when 6 inches off the edge of the road, there's a concrete abyss of darkness. It's supposedly the entrance to some kind of underground bunker or shelter, but it's been abandoned too long that no one seems to know the details. This thing is 3 feet high, 5 feet long, with no door or anything. It's impossibly dark inside, no matter how bright it is outside. If you're waiting for the train on this side, it's level with your car window and a foot away. Oh, and there's also a grave on the field side, where someone tried to race the train. No crossbars or lights at the crossing. I've been living here for only a couple years, and used to take the crossroad every day. Over time, though, I started to get a very strong sense of panic/impending doom as I get close to the crossing. At first, it's only occasionally, late at night. I chalked it up to me being a chicken. Then I started to get it more often than every night. Something there felt wrong. One particular night, I had such a strong panic that when I was turning onto the road, I almost stopped to turn around. I convinced myself I was being stupid and kept going. When I got to the track, there was a pickup truck sitting there on the road by the tracks. Like he was waiting for the train to cross, but there was no sign of the train. I kind of stopped a couple car lengths back and waited a second, confused. Then it happened. Thump something hit my car in the darkness. A small thump, but I almost had a heart attack. I noped right out and reversed like a madwoman until I could do a three-pointer in someone's driveway to turn around. I never found out what was going on with that truck or what hit my car. After a week of avoiding the crossroad, I again convinced myself that I was being silly. Around dusk, I took the road because it was still daylight, and I thought, it can't be scary in the light, right? Wrong. I felt like I was driving to my doom as soon as I passed the last house before the crossing. As I approached, I could see broken branches and debris all over the road. Scattered around the tracks, Nothing overhangs the tracks, and branches that big would have had to be dragged a ways to make it there. Things clearly broken and uprooted from around the bunker. A cop car with lights on by the building, but no cop in sight. I bolted. A month later, it's noon, broad daylight, and I'm driving home. I think, hey, I'll take the crossroad and see if it's still weird. Again, as soon as I get past the last house, I feel incredibly uneasy. Lo and behold, as I approach, I see something. A perfectly wrapped Christmas gift box placed perfectly smack dab in the middle of the road, on the middle of the tracks. It's about the width of a tire and silver with a red bow. There's not really enough space to pass by it, so I stop in front of the tracks and get ready to get out and move it. But I couldn't bring myself to open the door. My hand felt an icy chill the moment I grabbed the door handle. I wish I had a cool end to this story, but I don't. I didn't get out of the car or see anything else. I left and haven't taken that road since. Story 12. I've recently qualified as a train driver. After a year of training and heard a few stories from other drivers and my own time in the industry that stuck with me. One before coming over, I worked in station. One of the stations had 3 fatalities in 2 weeks. Someone who was jumping over the tracks to change platform when an empty service ran through, and the one that really sticks with me, a woman who walked off the platform into the path of a fast train. Not so much strange/creepy, but we have third rail here, a live rail carrying 750 DC on the ground that trains pull from to run. And if a badger brushes against it, it gets a bit of a zap. The badger will then turn around and bite down on its attacker, the third rail, and electrocute itself as soon as its jaw is close on the rail, the DC keeps it clamped on. Story 13. Not an operator, but this totally counts. My best friend lives on a rural private road that crosses 2 of the most active rail lines in my part of the state. There have been at least 3 accidental deaths from auto train collisions, but a year ago, 2 cars crossed the tracks right before a train. The first car had a middle-aged mom in it. She speeds over the tracks. The second car had her son and his girlfriend, mid-20s. The second car darts in front of the train and is obliterated. NTSB, sheriff, and BNSF arrive to investigate. The mother is hysterical, saying, "He was right behind me the whole time." They originally thought it was just another unfortunate case of someone trying to outrun the train, until they discovered the mom and son are from a city over an hour away. No one locally knew them. They didn't have permission to be on that private road. And then they found that the girlfriend had been dead for hours. They suspected the mom was helping her son try to find a dump spot to dispose of the body. Story 14. Not an engineer, and neither is my friend, but he was hit by a train many years ago. This isn't actually his story, because he doesn't remember that day. The story comes from the engineer and a farmer who saw it happen. My friend was a plumber on his way to work in his work van. It was cold, and his side windows were fogged up. He stopped at the crossing, but must not have seen the train coming. The train was only doing about 30 miles per hour. When the train hit the van, it made the van barrel roll on the tracks about 15 to 20 times before the van finally went off the tracks and settled in a ditch. This was before seatbelts, so he was rolling in the van with all the plumber tools and toolboxes. He is just covered in scars, but lucky to be alive. The funny part of the story is, when the farmer ran to him, my friend ran to the farmer and begged him to help him keep his overalls from falling down. He didn't realize he had just survived getting hit by a train. He was just worried about people seeing him naked. Story 15, not my story. On August 23rd, 1987, 2 boys, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, were run over by a cargo train in Bryant, Arkansas. They were lying next to each other in straight lines across the tracks and failed to move when the driver honked at them. The train was unable to stop in time. Story 16. I'm not a locomotive operator, but I've seen the aftermath of someone being struck by a train. I worked as a mortician, and the remains we received from the coroner for cremation were in extremely severe condition. Story 17. When I was around 16, my friends and I were by the train tracks in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. These weren't tracks for the CTA, but for freight trains, and was easily accessible from the street. We were there because a buddy of ours was doing a summer photography class for Columbia College and wanted to take cool pictures by the tracks. As we are walking along and he's snapping pictures, my friend noticed a black sex toy next to the tracks. We burst into laughter, starting to come up with theories as to how exactly it got there. And then, like the stupid kids we were, we started kicking it at each other. We were so caught up in avoiding being hit by it, we didn't notice the cop car rolling up on us until he gave a quick whoop of the siren. He asked us what we were doing there, and we told him our friend was shooting pictures for a photography project. He asked us for IDs, but we were all under 18, so all we had were our high school IDs. He takes them back to his car and runs our names, and then comes back and tells we need to leave because we're not allowed to be there. We didn't really know we couldn't, because Like I said, it was so easily accessible from the street, and we didn't see any signs saying to not enter. He followed us in his car until we were off the property and then left. On the walk back to my friend's house, we started laughing at what this cop must have thought. He never mentioned the sex toy, but we're sure he saw it, and I bet he thought we were doing some sort of really weird photography project. Story 18. Not a locomotive engineer, but a train rider. I'm an electrician riding the train for quality control. Coming back from Quebec City, we are riding at approximately 50 kilometers per hour. On a winding curve around a hill, we see a lady on a dog sled with her 4 dogs caught on the track. Before I even saw her, the engineers were standing up, screaming obscenities and honking the horn, an emergency horn. She managed to pry her sled free and drag the dogs out of the way within mere feet of us hitting her. Story 19. I used to be a shunter for QR years ago. We were reversing a passenger train back onto a platform and had to go over a crossing. I saw a guy stumbling towards the crossing. There was a pub on the other side of the crossing he was trying to get to. He looked at us, then coming back and decided to run right at the last second as we were already coming through the crossing. I called for the train to stop and jumped off the train to get to him the second he started running as I was watching him, and he got hit by one of the bumpers as the coupler stretched out. He was out cold on the ground with the wheels about 6 inches away from his torso. Holy crap, that one had me rocked for a while. Story 20. I was told this story by my dad. My dad was a motorman, engineer, for the Chicago Transit Authority. He came home very late one day, which was unusual, and at dinner told me and my mom that some guy was down on the tracks dancing on the third rail, the electrified rail. And this guy, due to being on the tracks, forced my dad to stop his train. While stopped and waiting for the cops, since my dad already called it into dispatch. The guy was just waltzing around dancing on the third rail in the front of my dad's train. Eventually, authorities got the guy, but if he'd made proper contact with the third rail, the guy would have been super dead. Fun fact, my dad radioed in the downtown flood back in the late 80s, early 90s. The flood is on one of the Modern Marvels Engineering Disasters episodes, Story 21. Not a conductor myself, but my commute to my campus is a 2-lane highway that runs parallel to a train track, and it has one crossing where the road and the track meet at an angle that basically forms a really squished X shape. One night, me and my cousin were carpooling back home from a midterm, and we were both pretty tired. A combination of exhaustion from those stressful midterms and the obvious weariness from late night drives. We were just doing our normal drive home when we were about to hit the railroad crossing. From a distance, I noticed that there was an unusually bright light oncoming from the railroad track. But considering that the crossing lights weren't blaring and the arms weren't coming down, I figured that it was just a maintenance truck that was inspecting the track at night when it wouldn't be too busy. So I kept driving, considering there was no real reason to stop. In my mind, the railroad lights would be flashing red if there was really a train coming through. But as we drew closer, it became more and more apparent that these headlights were moving real fast and didn't have the intent of stopping. That's when we heard a large horn blare at us from the tracks. And with that, I slammed the brakes and stopped just a few feet away from a one-way train ride to purgatory. Me and my cousin nearly pissed ourselves that night. We spent the rest of the drive arguing over whether the lights were on, and we didn't notice them because we were tired, or if I was just a bad driver. The crazy thing is, when we're driving back the next morning, there was a crazy traffic accident at the highway that caused massive buildup. It turned out that a car performed a sudden brake in front of the railroad crossing and caused the 4 cars behind it to rear-end one another. The local radio station was reporting on the accident, and it was revealed that the lead driver slammed the brakes when he noticed a train about to use the railroad crossing, even though the crossing arms were still up and the lights weren't going off. Luckily, no one was severely injured. Story 22 was boarding a train with my dad at King's Cross Station in Sydney, Australia. The platform was underground. It was peak hour. Platform was packed. The train arrives, quickly filled up. As is customary on inner-city trains, the carriage is filled to capacity in minutes, with lots of shoving and little space for bodies near the doors. An Asian woman attempts to leave the carriage in the crush, right as the doors are closing. She's trying to push her way out and comes through just as the doors close on her backpack. She is outside the train. Her backpack is in. She's pinned outside the train by the straps of her backpack, her legs kicking furiously, screaming. The passengers inside are yelling and trying to free her bag and open the electric doors. My father and I are next to the emergency brake button, which he is pressing to activate, but nothing is happening. The train is gaining momentum, and the end of the platform is quickly approaching. The end of the platform is walled in, and the next section of train line is a tunnel, the gap between the train and tunnel being only a few centimeters. In the last few meters before she passed the train and wall, the passengers managed to rip the doors open with the train moving and release her, where she fell from the sire of the train down onto the platform just short of the wall. The train continued on. As the doors slammed shut again, we just left her back there in a pile on the floor. and the surreal emergency was over. Story 23, have a related story. Grandpa was a train engineer, and he told me that one time they were on strike. This would have been well before the 1980s when he told me the story and was already retired, and so management was actually driving the train. So the union was having a meeting, and one of the other engineers says he had noticed that when he was hunting, he had a perfect view into the train's window as it came around this certain bend in the mountain, and he could always see who was driving the train through his scope from his favorite tree stand. So he says he could easily hurt the manager. The other guys get mad because now he has told them his plan, and in court they make you swear on the Bible. So if they were asked, they would have to say that he said he was going to do it. So they are mad at him and tell him he can't do it now that he told them his plan. What has always stuck with me about that story was that they were so upset about their jobs. They were fine with the guy killing one of the managers, but they were too religious to lie about it on the Bible. Story 24. 2 years ago, around this time of year, early fall, the leaves of the surrounding trees had started to drop. This revealed something obscure I had just caught a glimpse of passing by at about 60 miles per hour. I thought to myself, weird, was that a Halloween decoration out early? But it was on the opposite side of a home's backyard fence with quite a few trees around. So why would there be Halloween decorations there? I didn't think much more of it as I continued on my shift. Then, the following day, the tracks were closed in that area for a few hours for a police investigation. Turns out, it was a man who hung himself sometime in the summer and had been hanging there for a few months unnoticed until the leaves started to fall. Creeped out a bunch of us, knowing we operated by him a couple times a day, unknowingly. Story 25, I am engineer but not a train engineer. My company do computer/network consulting for lots of train operators, including one of the underground/subway train operators here in the UK. The computer department at this train company were all massive geeks, often developing their own systems and solutions to assist and automate a lot of the manual tasks carried out on the tracks. One system they developed would log where each train stopped at the platform, whether it overshot or undershot where it was supposed to, and log this all to graphs in their IT control center. One day, they noticed that every train at one station was overshooting, only by a couple of feet, but they were all stopping slightly further down the platform than they were supposed. They initially thought maybe the sensor had become misaligned and was reading incorrectly, so managed to convince the management to delay the trains for a few minutes so someone could jump down onto the tracks and realign the sensor. What they actually found was something very different. At some point during the previous night, a homeless guy had snuck onto the platform, walked down the service ramp alongside the tracks, well past where the public should be, and just outside of the CCTV camera coverage. He set himself up to sleep next to the air vent of one of the machine rooms, probably because of the warm air coming from it. Unfortunately, at some point that night, he rolled/slipped from where he was sleeping and was hit by one of the service trains running through. No one noticed. The reason all the trains were overshooting the platform, the trains were going through the mess left over from the accident. That was the day I learned the term red lubricant. The next project we were involved with was adding more CCTV cameras. Story 26. My dad was a train driver for most of his life. We live in the Netherlands where towns are really close by each other, so a train would go back and forth multiple times a day, sometimes even every hour. So early one morning, he spots a person sitting near the train tracks. You can't really stop a train, so he radios it in for others to keep an eye out. On the return trip, he slows down as he passes the spot and notices the person is wearing pajamas. It was still very early at that point. On the following pass up again, he slows the train down to a crawl, and for sure the perso is still sitting there. So Dad stops the train, announces to the early morning commuters that there is a slight technical problem, and gets out to talk to the person. Turns out the person was a patient of the nearby mental institution and was going to plan to end his life by train. So Dad convinces him not to and takes him back to the institution. He apparently said something like, "Hey, are you missing a patient because I found him or her? I don't remember the gender." He gets back to his train, announces the technical issues are solved, and continues working for the day. My dad was a great guy. Story 27. I'm a conductor, and I have been lucky enough to avoid anything too wild myself, but I have heard a couple stories. One was a full crew, engineer, conductor, and switchman, working in a small yard about an hour away from their home terminal. Last move of the day, they had just put all their cars together and started shoving back. It was a cold day, lots of snow, and the switchman decided he'd hop on the cars as they came by so he didn't have to walk as much putting brakes on. He slipped while getting on the car and ended up getting run over at the hip. The last words he ever spoke to other people were, "You guys ran me over," on his radio. He bled out before either of the other guys made it to him. The other story was about a conductor riding a cut of cars down the tracks to a customer track. This track runs through a pretty rough part of town, and you're always looking out for people near or on the tracks. He comes around a bend and sees a pile of junk in the middle of the tracks. No big deal. As they get close, the pile of junk sits up straight and looks the conductor dead in the eye. This guy didn't stand a chance. They soaked the train, but they plowed into the guy doing about 20 miles per hour. He was a complete mess when the conductor found him crumpled up like a pretzel under the second or third car. Somehow lived until the ambulance came, but died in hospital. Just a little side note, don't screw around with railroad equipment. Stay off the tracks, stay off the cars. Everything is steel, and it has zero forgiveness. There are no minor accidents on the railroad. I love my job as a conductor, and I dread the idea that one day somebody might take that joy away by being stupid around my train. Story 28. Not a train operator, but I saw a deer get hit by a train. It was just standing on the tracks. The train honked the horn, but it just stood there. It was incredibly depressing. Story 29. In 1985, my wife and I were traveling across Tanzania to Lake Tanganyika when the train struggled to a halt going up a grade in the night. We were the only non-Africans on the train. People started yelling to close the windows. Thieves had put palm oil on the tracks, stopping the train, and were on the roof trying to rob people through the windows. There were a lot of armed soldiers on the train, and the thieves quickly disappeared into the night. People walked along and poured sand on the tracks so the train had enough traction to climb the grade past the oil. Story 30. Former train driver's assistant, back when it was British Rail. A driver and I hit a cow that had wandered on the tracks. We were doing 60 miles per hour in a Class 31 coming back from Whitemoor Depot in Ely, around 3 a.m. This would have been in 1987 or 1988. It burst like an organ-filled water balloon. Didn't do any damage to the engine, but wrecked the cow. That's the strangest. The creepiest was when I'd moved to the clerical side of things and was a ticket office supervisor at Royston Station. Train that wasn't meant to stop between Stevenage and Cambridge pulled into the platform and stayed there. After a minute or two, the driver sounded the horn, so I put on a HV vest and went to see him. He'd hit a man that end his life. There's a curve a mile or so south before getting into Royston, and he just decided that was the place to do it. Local newspaper reported he'd lost his job. His family were on holiday somewhere sunny, so he had nobody to talk to or vent to. So he left a note and just ended it. The incident inspector that came to evaluate things was an ex-driver I knew, John. He got into the forefoot to look at the underside of the train. I was going through a divorce at the time, and it shook me up quite a lot. Story 31. My dad worked for the railroad for years running a crane truck to fix train cars and derailments. Part of the areas he worked was North and South Dakota. Apparently, in a few of the Indian reservations out there, it was pretty common for the locals to get drunk in town and walk the train tracks at night and pass out on the tracks. I can't imagine getting drunk enough not to wake up to a train. Then again, I don't think I've ever been drunk enough to pass out outside in winter. Story 32. Train ran pretty close behind the farm I used to live on. There were these marble-sized, perfectly sphere-shaped iron balls. My dad said they were from a nasty train derailment right behind our farm when my father was a young child living on the same farm. Nothing creepy about it, other than I heard people got hurt during the derailment. As far as I understand it, the sphere-shaped metal balls were from a mine on the way to a smeltery. They were perfect for using with my slingshot. Story 33. When I was a student engineer, I was coming on the final stretch of our night local. Earlier that night, I was talking with my crew about what to do if we hit someone or had a near miss. The stretch of track we run on has one of the highest fatality rates, and I know that each person on that crew each had at least 10 kills. Well, the early morning sun was just starting to come up, and we came around a corner in town to see a garbage bag laying on the rail about 100 feet after a crossing. My conductor makes a joke about how I better not hit the trash. I start whistle sequence, and as I do my final horn, I see that garbage bag move and look up. It was a guy sitting on the rail in all black, waiting to end his life. I dump it and just stare at this guy as we barrel down on him, and the whole time he just stares right back at me. When he disappeared in front of the nose of the engine, it felt like an eternity. I actually thought he jumped out of the way, until I heard him hit the cattle guard. Passed away in the hospital later that day. Story 34. Not an operator, but I worked track maintenance. Our work train had just pulled out of the track next to us while we were working nights one night, so I just decided to stroll down that track alongside where our machines were working. It was a rough town, so you always expect junk and booze along the tracks. Figuring I had enough light between machines, I went without my headlamp and walked past this lone boot-dead center of the track. I remember thinking to myself, some poor homeless guy out there is stumbling around out there bootless. Well, as it turns out, not too much farther down the track, our lead machine calls out for a civilian next to our track. After a second or two, you hear his voice go cold, and we decided to walk up and investigate. Turns out some drunk had been crawling under the work train as it pulled out, mangling his body pretty badly. Kinda creepy that in the dark, I'd managed to miss a body not 10 feet off the track I was walking on. I use my headlamp every time now. Story 35. 14 years old and messing around with a buddy in a train switching yard and figured we would open the back of one of the train cars to see what was in it. Not necessarily to burglarize it, but we figured it would be an adventure. Break the seal, open the doors, and were immediately buried in literally tons of split peas. Scared the living crap out of us. And we had to swim out from under this 10-foot tall avalanche, which was not easy to do. Literally the closest I'd ever come to death at that point in my life. I've always wondered how our parents would have dealt with their sons being drowned in peas in a rail yard. Story 36. Not my story, but a colleague, a kangaroo, got hit by a train and got stuck in the front coupler. The crew couldn't see it from the cab. So the train drove through the middle of the CBD kangaroo, swinging from the front of a packed peak time commuter train. Story 38. One evening, I'm coming east on a deadhead, empty commuter train, through Ella Grange, IL, where there are 3 road crossings about a block apart. The gates activate about 30 seconds before the train occupies the crossing, so as I'm approaching the middle crossing, 2 cars are just getting across to the other side. Mind you, there are 3 tracks through this location, and the cars are on the far side, 2 tracks over. I'm coming into town at about 50 miles per hour, and as the gates go down, the second car puts on the reverse lights and proceeds to back up across all 3 mains and ends up bumping into the gate behind it and stops. At this point, the front 1/3 of the car in the foul, and it's a sure thing I'm going to hit this car, so I put the train into emergency. The driver realizes they're about to get hit and the woman jumps out of the car. Well, the car was still in reverse, and when she got out the car, it took off down the street and she started running after it. I came to a stop, recovered the air, reported it to the dispatcher, and then went on my way and finished out the evening. It was one of the craziest near hit I've had. Story 39, I worked as a train conductor several years ago. Hitting people or cars always sucked. But as far as strangest/creepiest, I caught a freight train from our home terminal to our away terminal in the middle of the night. Along the way, we saw something small and black on the track, but it was very small and obviously not moving. Looked like an old trash bag. Maybe cloth or maybe a blown out tire. Nothing out of the usual people throw crap on the rails all the time. Road switcher crew went on duty the next morning over that section of track. Turns out there was a kid in that jacket, and all the trains that ran that night had went over him without realizing it was a person. Reminded me of what Tom Cruise said in Collateral about a guy dying on a train and nobody noticing until 2 days later. Story 40. My dad was an engineer most of his life. He's hit at least 3 or 4 people over his career. Most of them homeless, passed out on the tracks, or with headphones on, not paying attention. The worst one happened when I was about 16 or so, and I remember it well. There was a teenage couple hanging out in a tunnel. He saw them, honked his horn, and tried to stop the train. They started running, but the tunnel was pretty long and the train was coming fast. The boyfriend was running first, holding his girlfriend's hand and basically dragging her along with him. The boyfriend ended up making it out of the tunnel just in time, but his girlfriend, whose hand he was holding, didn't. That really ducked my dad up. Me being about the same age didn't help things. I remember seeing it on the news and finding an article online about it, which I saved to my computer at the time. My dad got really mad and deleted it. Can't blame him. His conductor was also an a-hole and kept messing with him for weeks to come, banging on the front of the engine like the sound it made when her body hit. Really messed up. Story 41. I work on long-haul passenger trains as a conductor. While I usually don't see us hitting things, have only hit animals thus far, I absolutely hear it if it goes under the train and sends the ballast flying. We hit something a week ago, and as usual I heard the ballast, but whatever we hit was flung into the undercarriage right where I was standing, so I felt it. A driver told us he hit a kangaroo but didn't kill it, and it wedged into the front of the train for a couple minutes before being jostled out and under. He said the screaming still gave him nightmares. Story 42. An addict got into an argument with his girlfriend and decided the best way to show her was to hurt himself by train. He stomped right out in front of us like a kid about to slam their bedroom door. Clung, smacked him at 40 miles per hour, dead center of the cowcatcher. We were on an empty grain train, so we were stopped fairly close. I walked back and my student reluctantly followed me. He was laying not 10 feet from the tracks, just groaning and mumbling. I was shocked that he still had all his limbs or that his head didn't just explode. I was standing next to him and while talking to our dispatcher on the radio, trying to get EMS to him because he was miraculously alive. He rolled over super quickly when he heard sirens, and I can see his femur pressing against his jeans. As soon as we can see a few cops walking up, he got up and ran. He didn't get far, but continued to fight the cops when they got up to him. That student doesn't work for thee anymore. Story 43. I was working in China in the 1990s on an upgrade to Beijing Metro. We were looking for a problem track circuit in a tunnel, whilst the line was closed. I had a Chinese translator with me in my meter. We walked in pitch darkness, using torches for about 200 meters, and in the distance I could see 2 bright orange glows. It was quiet, spooky, and even though my brain told me it must be something normal, It looked like the eyes of a demon. Then we started to hear animalistic grunts. I was scared now, and even my translator thought we should turn back. As we approached, I shone my torch into the distance. Their with their bare asses hanging over the tracks, were two Chinese construction workers taking dumps between the running rails. The orange demon-eyes glow were from the cigarettes they were smoking. They just ignored us, and we walked by as they continued to grunt not unsubstantial piles of poop between the rail. It was nasty. Story 44. Creepiest for me was driving the train after it had hurt someone. First week driving unsupervised, and I get called out to relieve the driver after someone end life by standing in front of his train. Got clearance to move the train and couldn't get the brakes to release. Didn't take long to troubleshoot the fault. The emergency brake handle was still engaged hours after the fact. I reset it and carried on. Story 45. Train engineer here. Not scary or strange, just a weird experience. Was coming into a stop at a platform after a long straight. All of a sudden, I see something small in the middle of the tracks. I slam the emergency brakes, and when I get closer, I see it's a small dog without a leash, something the size of a Jack Russell. Clearly, it had run away from its owner, as I spot on the platform a panicking woman running after the dog on the platform. The dog was running straight at my train barking. My thoughts were, crap, I'm going to hurt someone's pet, and the dog disappeared from my sight. I almost didn't stomach it, but I had to go out and look what's happened. Turned out the little rat was so little, he passed underneath the train. In the other end of the train, the dog's owner were, and the dog, which had miraculously passed underneath the entire train without getting hit by the undercarriage. Poor thing, were probably traumatized, but lucky he survived. Story 46. Not a train operator, but work on the railway making it safe for other people to work. Basically, making sure the electricity won't hurt you. My brother, my dad, and I were working at around 8 p.m. Dad noticed a small public footbridge over the railway as we were walking down the track. He points it out, saying he had never noticed it before and wondered what it was for. One side lead to dense trees, the other to an abandoned coal pit. Just as we're discussing whether or not it actually is open to the public, we spot a woman on it looking down at us. We realized it must be open to the public. Then she slowly sunk out of sight. We didn't see her again. We checked both sides of the bridge, but she had gone. No idea who she was or what she was doing. Story 47. A bonfire in the woods with a bunch of juggalos hanging out. Faces were all painted up. Even had a big wooden cutout of the mascot guy, which they burned. On one morning at like 7 a.m. on a Sunday, I saw a guy getting a BJ from an escort. I've seen girls tanning topless. Story 48. I wasn't a train operator, but a mechanic. While inspecting signaling equipment underneath a locomotive, I noticed what appeared to be part of human remains caught on one of the components. We contacted the authorities and later learned that it was connected to a fatal incident involving someone who had stepped in front of the train. The engine was several cars back, which is likely why it went unnoticed. Story 49. Man decides to end his life by standing in the tracks, and his dog is coming to the afterlife with him. The dog doesn't want to die and breaks away from him. He repeatedly chases the dog and drags it to the tracks only to have it break away. Ultimately, the dog survived, he didn't. And the train was held up for hours for a full accident investigation complete with urine/blood testing the crew. This all took place where the tracks are near a picnic area, so there are plenty of families with kids that were unwilling witnesses to his selfish act. Story 50. I fix track. I don't run trains, but lots and lots and lots of dead animals. And I don't mean dead and together in one piece. Generally, coyotes, foxes, and lots of deer. The only one I found sad was a Rottweiler. That was a tough one, trying to track down the owner and tell them not to go looking for it, but also to know he's not coming home. At least he didn't suffer. Story 51. I've never been a train operator, but I lived in a town right by the train station and we had a very sad accident. There was a well-known and loved woman in the town. One day she had decided to go for a run. She had her music blasting, the police said, so she couldn't hear the train behind her while she ran on the tracks. I had gone to school with her son, but never knew him. She had 3 kids. That part stays in my memory. She had kids, a family, a life, and then, boom, gone. They said she died instantly and didn't suffer. Thank God for that much. Story 52. I have a good friend who works on the railroad, and it's not necessarily creepy, but the most sad situation he told me about was when a worker got shackled up between 2 train cars. And once that happens, you're basically done when they unshackle you. You bleed to death, and even EMTs can't stop you. They called the ambulance and then his wife, and he talked to his wife and cried while they unshackled the cars from him. Story 53. Not an engineer, but a locomotive electrician. My U/is a giveaway. I found a dead snake in the engine compartment of a freight locomotive one winter. Scared the crap out of me. Story 54. Not me, but my dad. We used to live in Southern California, and he drove the Sprinter for about a year. One day, a Chihuahua jumps up on the track and starts running. Full sprint in front of him. He slowed the train down as much as he could, I think a minimum of 5 miles per hour, and followed this thing for 2 or 3 miles before it jumped back over the track rails and laid on its back, panting. He got a reprimand for reporting it, however, because he said on the radio, "This little guy is hauling ass in front of me. What do I do?" Don't say ass on the radio. Story 55. Not a train operator, but former peace officer. Dude got drunk and fell asleep with his head laying one of the rails. The other was a Ford Courier. Older rancher thought he could cross with his little truck. It high-centered on one track. Poor old guy went running down the tracks waving his arms, trying to stop the train. When it finally stopped, the truck was so attached to the front of the engine that a tow truck couldn't pull it off. We had to chain it to the tracks and back the locomotive up. That poor old guy, it was his only transportation. Story 56. My father is a train engineer who works at a steel mill. Fair warning, this one is a bit sad. He told me about the time that a fellow steel mill employee got caught between the wheels and gears or brakes of a train. Not sure, as I was told this a couple years ago. He was still alive only by having something stopping it from completely killing him, and there was no way to help him. The company decided to call his family so that they could see him before he died. My father didn't see this happening, but the information spread to him via his coworkers. Story 57. I almost hit a mailman once, so close I could see his face. He was wearing earbuds and didn't see us. I'm very thankful we didn't hit him. You're supposed to look away from the car you're about to hit because it could really duck you up if you actually see the person's face. We had a crew hit a girl not long ago. She walked up to the rail and just laid on top of it. Pretty ducked up deal. Story 58. Just a few hours ago, a middle-aged woman was full-on sprinting at my train and tried to jump on as we passed her, getting her ass knocked over into the ballast in the process after a failed attempt. She promptly got right up and was ready to try again. Had I not stopped the train and my conductor stepped down and scared her off. She wasn't wearing shoes either, ducking strange. She was definitely on something. And this was one of the sketchier parts of Phoenix too. Story 59. Not a train operator, but I've taken the last metro enough. I once looked out the window to see two guys on what looked like an oversized handcart from the olden days. Very creepy for a drunk girl in the wee am. Turns out that thing goes along the tracks every night. I wave to them now if I happen to see them. It's actually a pretty neat rig when you know what it is. For anybody who wanted to actually sleep tonight. Story 60. Coming down a hill, 50 miles per hour, see 3 people on the overhead walkway. I see a lot of movement, and suddenly one person is pushed off the walkway and just hangs there. 15 feet below the walkway, dead center in my window, is a body hanging from the walkway. I have no time. Close my eyes and hear the thud. Come to a stop. Conductor goes back and finds a mannequin. These 2 rocket scientists tied a rope around the neck of a fully dressed mannequin, then tossed him off the walkway as we approached. Good times. Story 61. I work as a driver in Australia. Many years ago, on a remote section of track, we passed by 2 cars with headlights on just in the tree line, about 40 meters from the track. They appeared to be digging. Didn't occur to me until days later why they may have been digging in the middle of night in a remote area. Story 62. Not an operator, but my great-grandfather, a devout Christian man who always walked and never drove, told a story once and wouldn't talk of it again about a strange encounter on the tracks. Walking home from the mines in eastern Kentucky one night after his shift, he saw a figure in the distance on the other side of the tracks coming towards him. As they came close together and passed each other, he saw clearly just shoulders and a body. Story 63. For about a year in North Carolina, we had a guy that would come stand next to the track in the very last hours of the night, or just before the sun would come up, and just stand there. Here's the punchline though. He was always wearing a dress with high heels and a veil over his face. He would just stand there creepily and turn his head away slightly as if he was blushing from a compliment. We affectionately referred to him as man legs. Story 64. I'm so late, but whatever. One day when I was about 14, my friend and I were walking down the train tracks and there was just a dog in between the rails. Our friend lived nearby, so we went to his house to show him, and all 3 of us poked it with a stick for a few minutes and then left. Story 65. We have in-cab CCTV in order to make sure it's safe to move off with cameras on outside of each carriage. At one very old station, I noticed a man standing on the platform and a passenger walked through him. I put it down to a camera glitch and thought his image was just stuck on screen. Until I moved away and the man stayed in same place and appeared in same position on each camera as I pulled away. Story 66. My friend with a massive fear of dogs was getting stalked by one near train tracks. He needs to cross the tracks to get home, but after he did, he noticed the dog was just sitting in the middle of the tracks and a train was coming. As the train was maybe 4 seconds away, he kicked it. Really small dog, so it went flying and saved its life. Story 67. I'm not a train operator, but worked maintenance on Amtrak trains at the Union Station in Portland. Or when the train hit people, it was a big mess, and hazmat would come out to clean up. Occasionally, they would miss something. One of our people were looking up under the engine and found a finger. still perfectly formed and with a fake painted nail jammed up under there. Story 68. People used to flash the trains at my old job. I forget which town it was, but there was a rock that everyone knew as there will probably be a naked old guy waving to us or a couple there having sex. Again, story 69. Work at an oil refinery with a main line track that runs along the boundary. A vagrant fell off the car. He was discovered when the next train saw something on the tracks stopped and sent a guy to pull the dead deer off the tracks. Story 70. 3 men duck with a woman on a bridge. We go over while we were going 40 miles an hour. This has happened multiple times in different spots. Thankfully, they always get out of the way. A lot of homeless addicts around here, and they seem to do it all the time. Subway workers, tunnel rats, and explorers of Reddit. What's your scariest unexplained true story of the underground? Story 1. There's an abandoned and boarded up World War II fort in the southern part of Belgium that we often sneak into with the scouts. Getting in there requires scaling a sheer wall, where we've placed anchoring points for ropes and climbing gear next to a relatively busy road. So you're being super quiet, making no light and cowering every time a car passes by so he doesn't spot you in his lights. The atmosphere is set. The moment you enter it, it's like diving into water. Sound stops and the entire place is at a constant 14 degrees Celsius with a slight breeze passing through. The tunnel is barely large enough for me, slightly broader than the average person, to pass without turning my body sideways. The tunnel is just high enough to work up a decent gait while hunched over. If someone ahead of you blocks a passage for a moment, the breeze stops and it feels like the entire tunnel network takes a breath. Because of the way the tunnels are constructed, they echo in such a way that your own footsteps seem to be coming from behind you. They also seem to take one more step than you do when you stop. Of course, we don't allow the guys and gals to take any source of light in there, so it's pretty scary overall. So I'm in there, posted at a side passage to ensure everyone takes the same path and doesn't get lost. I go in first before any of the climbers arrive, so they don't know there are friendly faces in there to help them. I'm in there for a while, just waiting for the first to come by, when I see a dancing little light coming down the long hallway. I quietly settle back in my nook and wait for whoever was smart enough to hide some matches and take them away. The light quietly bobs closer when I realize there aren't any footsteps accompanying. I poke my head around the corner just in time to see it disappear. I hear no footsteps still. I settle back and wait some more when I realize I do hear some scuffling. Very faint, breathing noises, but still very faint. I become aware of a wet heat coming from right in front of me, with a faint smell of person, sweat, dirt. Suddenly I realize there's someone there, right in front of me, inches from my face. The breathing stops suddenly, whatever it is aware of me as well. Whatever or whoever it is, we're both holding our breath, both acutely aware of each other. It takes ages. I'm sitting there, unable to move, speak, or breathe properly. The wet heat passes, and some minutes later I become aware of very faint light coming from my right side, which soon dissipates and leaves. Sometime later still, I hear the familiar stomping of combat boots coming down the hallway from my left. I stop the person, tell them to keep following the passageway and take the first right they come to. Out of curiosity, I ask who went in first. No one. He went in first. Spoiler. It was explained much later. The first guy got lost down a dead-end side passage and the second girl passed him by. She got nervous from the footsteps and removed her shoes. She saw me poke my head from around the corner and dropped the match. She passed me very slowly. One of the later checkpoints said she was crying her eyes out. Story 2. There used to be an old abandoned school in a town by my house. It was heavily boarded up and super hard to get into. Well, a friend and I managed to get inside by climbing up the side of the school via a pipe/fire escape combo and slipping through a window on the roof. We explored the basement, which was flooded. It was kind of creepy seeing stairs disappear into water. We had just left the gym when we heard footsteps coming from the doors on the other side of the gym. Scary, especially considering it sounded like it was one person, not another group of explorers like us. And blocking our exit back up to the roof, the only way out otherwise, was behind us, through boarded up doors. They sounded like someone who was walking around and stopping periodically. There was no light coming from that direction, and we couldn't fathom why someone would come into a creepy place like this alone. We waited for the footsteps to stop, then snuck across the gym, peered down the hallways, saw no one, and continued towards the stairs which would lead us back to the roof. Halfway down the hall, we hear someone sprinting behind us, probably 50 meters away or so, down a typical high school hallway. Now it is mostly dark in here, but there was a small amount of light coming in through cracks in the window boards. Still, we didn't see anything behind us as we quickly ran up the stairs. We didn't stop until we got back to the 4th floor. We listened for noise. Nothing. Hopped out the window and climbed back down the pipe. Story 3. Freshman year of high school, I noticed this large panel under an old staircase in the basement of a school building. For years, my buddies and I talked about opening it, but it was across the hall from the office of the lady in charge of misdemeanors and suspension. Fast forward to the last day of senior year, after most of everyone had left. My two buddies and I, in formal attire from the day's events, unscrewed the panel from the wall. Sure enough, there was a tunnel about 5 feet below the floor. Luckily, there was a sturdy stool for us to climb down. There was a system of tunnels down there, but our exploration was limited since we were in good clothes and there was standing water down some of the tunnels. The unexplained part is that while there were pipes where we went, there were tunnels without pipes that went out from the building's footprint and not towards any other building. These tunnels had inches deep standing, nasty water, so we couldn't go in them in rented dress shoes. But we could make out that they connected to other tunnels, which seemed to serve no purpose. I doubt there was anything sinister going on, but we thought it was pretty creepy at the time. Story 4 was playing in the woods and tripped over something solid. It was a cement circle and realized it was an underground door. The next day I come back with a crowbar to open, and like hell I'm going in unarmed. Pull it up, and it's a Cold War era personal bomb shelter. That failed? There was a giant crack in the roof. The floor was covered in slime, but what was worse is the walls are covered in writings. This is the end. We must die. Everyone is gone. Till I find the back wall and a giant red scrawl, "Get the duck out of my home." That's it, damn this. I'm ducking out. I sprint up the door and close it. I don't want to know what the hell that was. But I come back the next day. It's burned out. I didn't set a fire intentionally, and I didn't smell smoke leaving. Story 5, although it's technically not urban exploring, as a former electrician, I think I can still share one moment from a job I had to do about 13 years ago. Me and my job partner were called out to a larger restoration job that was being done to an older house from the early 1900s. The house was, until this point, a family-owned house, which had 2 owners since it was built, and the last owner was an old lady who had passed away there whilst being the last person in her family line. Sad story on its own, and nobody could take over the house. So the house got auctioned to a younger couple that bought it for an insane amount of money due to how large the house was. But it was now time to get the old house up to modern standards, which included a completely new installation from scratch, as the old cables around the house were the type of cables that was insulated with black cotton and fastened with handcrafted wooden clamps. While working in the first floor was quite easy, as the entire installation process was made to fit inside the new wall frames that the carpenters were setting up, we eventually had to move on to the second floor and prepare for setting up a new intake from the attic, which would then pass down to the new main fuse box on the second floor. We opened the hatch to the attic, and while using the flashlight to look up there, we could surely see that the attic was very cramped, so the smallest of us would have to go up there to fix everything to get the intake cable settled while removing the old one. As you might guess, I was the smallest of us and had to do that crafty job of going up where nobody probably had been for many years. So I decided to grab a lunch break and mentally prepare myself for what I expected to become a pretty crap job. After eating, I grabbed my flashlight and tool belt and started climbing up the stairs. And while climbing upwards, I noticed that the smell that we thought was pretty much old people smell after they die was getting increasingly stronger. But I had to continue, so I got to the top and crawled myself onto something stable when I got up, while noticing that the smell up there was pretty damn bad. So I grabbed my flashlight to look around and get somewhat oriented about where to crawl. Looking forward, it seemed like a pretty straightforward route towards the intake point that I could see in the distance. But out of curiosity, I wondered if there were anything up there. So I looked to my right, only to light up 5 carcasses of what once was the old lady's cats that probably had died. At that moment, I absolutely regretted my decision to eat lunch, as the sight of this, along with the realization about what I had smelled all along, was these dead cats, and immediately threw up on the spot before very swiftly noping the duck out of there. After some talk back and forth, we slowly realized that the elderly woman may have been putting her cats up there as they died over the years. But we will never know for sure, since the lady had died. The new owners had no idea about this when buying the house, but our company ended up denying to continue the work until the attic had been cleaned appropriately. This apparently took them about 1 month to complete. I guess there are not many companies who wants to deal with that kind of nasty stuff, but my partner at work ended up finishing the work on the attic afterwards, as he felt kind of bad for me. In the end, I decided to not continue being an electrician anymore, as this was not work I really enjoyed doing, especially not after this event. Story 6. I used to do a lot of exploring in my younger days, mainly when my friends and I would skip school and decide our time was better spent finding new places to explore than actually learning in a structured environment. I should mention I'm an Australian, just in case anyone wanted to do any type of research on any of these places. One of our favorite places to explore was a place called White Bay Power Station, which was a coal-powered station that closed its doors on Christmas Day 1983. We were exploring between the years of 1997 and 2000, so the decay had well and truly set in by this time. On a side note, films such as The Matrix Reloaded and Mission Impossible had parts filmed here. Anyway, this place was absolutely huge. It has all of the usual abandoned adornments, such as graffiti and satanic signs and messages scrawled over the walls. There was also a time we went and found a freshly dead pigeon which had a noose around its neck. It was also multi-leveled. The exact number of levels were hard to determine because it would all depend on which flight of stairs you took, which part of the power station you entered from, and which actual part of the power station you were in. On some flights of stairs, you could be 8 floors up and be able to see through the metal staircase you were standing on due to it decaying from rust. The most dangerous thing about this place was the way some levels would just drop off. There would be a big concrete platform, then nothing, no railings or anything to stop you falling off. There was also a door which we opened that took us onto the roof, a roof I nearly fell off because I got dizzy from the sheer height of the roof. Though the scariest part of the whole power plant were the big chutes they used to store the coal in. This is hard to explain, but I will try my best. Imagine having 2 thin metal catwalks on either side of huge metallic void. You couldn't see more than 4 feet in front of you on the catwalks because of the sheer darkness in the inside of the voids that the coal was stored in were the blackest darkness you can imagine. So basically, standing on these catwalks were much like walking the plank, except you can't see anything in front of you, and if the floor below you gave way, you were done for. We also used to frequent old train tunnels in Sydney. It was quite startling to be walking through a pitch-black tunnel, come around a bend, and see the light from the other side, with the figure of a person walking towards you. This used to happen pretty often, as the homeless and addict would take refuge in the tunnels to either get out of the elements or to take substances. Funnily enough, some of the best tunnels were put back in to use for the 2000 Sydney Olympic tram services. Now they are all cleaned up and well lit. Another type of place we used to explore a lot were underground canals and drainage tunnels. We got so good at mapping them out that we knew which tunnels to take to get us as close as possible to fast food outlets for lunch. We found one weird tunnel one day. We were walking along and noticed an offshoot which made us drop to our knees and crawl. At the end of this tunnel, there was what I could best describe as a small water reservoir. The water in it was only about an inch lower than the pipe we were in and had a newish-looking ladder about 5 foot away on the left side of the pipe. We are currently crouched in a metal grate above it. We had to maneuver ourselves on an angle right on the lip of the pipe and jump and grab the ladder and climb out of the grate. We found out pretty quickly that the whole thing looked so new because we were now standing in someone's backyard. I have a lot more places I've explored. I'll share a few more if I haven't bored everyone to death. Story 7. My buddy and me spent many years crawling through sewer pipes. One day we were out in the woods. Me, him, and another friend. We were deep in the woods. We found some pipes sticking out of a hillside and agreed to explore it. Well, we crawled down this thing a good 600 feet or so on our hands and knees. At times it gets smaller and we are on our stomachs. Finally, it comes to one of those big manhole rooms, and we get the impression we're under a house. Of course, Webb also know that in some places, manholes will exist in the middle of nowhere for future development. Anyways, the room has 3 other super small pipes heading off into different directions, like slither on your stomach size. We choose one and make our friend Z go first. We go down about 300 feet and he shouts back that there's something in the way. He thinks it's a dead animal. But since we are using weak headlamps, he can't tell. We coerce him to climb over it. Then comes me. He's freaking out saying crap is all over his clothes and he didn't know what it was. I climb over this dark lump of refuse. Feels like a body, but not human. Not even animal, just alien. Smells bad. Smells horrible. I slide over this nasty crap, almost puking. My buddy behind me comes next. Same story. We keep going, asking ourselves why we even do this crap in the first place. Exploration, etc. Into the unknown, the forbidden. We crawl another few hundred feet. Z starts complaining about a horrible god-awful stench ahead. We can't for the life of him get him to continue. He ends up throwing up. We start throwing the idea around of gas of some sort. He says with his headlamp, there's something big up ahead. Looks like a honest-to-God body. Human, maybe. We slide backwards quickly until we get to the manhole room. We crawl out quickly. We get into the daylight and investigate the crap stuck to our clothes from the thing we slid over. It's dark. Bloody dark. Refuse dark. Looks like fur. We agree that it was probably a trapped animal. Never go back ever again. Story 8. I work for the MTA in NYC. The underground train system is the perfect place for homeless people to escape the elements. I walked into a fully naked man bathing under a leaking hot water pipe. That was pretty terrifying. Story 9. I currently attend a state university full-time. By the description, you might be able to figure out which one. I'm currently a senior living in private housing downtown. but sophomore year I lived in the university's only downtown quad. It was built in the early 1920s and definitely looked it compared to the uptown campus and housing quads. I was in the basement lounge area, grabbing my mail, when I noticed a nearby door that wasn't usually open and a nearby maintenance worker. I casually asked the guy what was down there. He said, "Don't know. We just store our materials on the stairs." My curiosity got the better of me, and I asked him if I could take a look to see what was all the way at the bottom of the flight of stairs. He said, "I don't see why not. Just don't get hurt on anything down there and try to be back before my supervisor gets back in 15. This guy should definitely have not let me down there, because he clearly hadn't seen it. There was friable asbestos literally everywhere, particularly the decomposing ceiling tiles. I turned on my phone flashlight to find that it was some kind of sealed-off research area. The stairs led to a hallway, which looks like it may have been hospital-like at one time, but it had since experienced some heavy water damage. There were approximately 7 rooms on either side with one-way glass pane in each, with some kind of 90s intercom panel to the right. Inside each room were heavily rusted bed frames, a sink, and a toilet. All the way at the end of the hall were a series of file cabinets. I would have looked to see what they contained, but figured it would only be a cloud of black mold spores, so I decided against it. Nothing inherently creepy about the area, I suppose, but definitely interesting. Story 10. My grandpa got lost in Mammoth Cave after he got back from World War II. Apparently, before he was drafted, it was not a national park, and the rules around exploring it were very loose. The property it was on was privately owned, and locals were known to trespass to explore the cave. Or that's what my grandpa used to tell me. He and his friends very well may have been the only people trespassing. While my grandpa was serving in the Pacific Theater, the cave became a national park. After arriving home, my grandpa and his friends that survived the war went back to explore for old time's sakes. They were wandering around with flashlights when they heard a tour group, considering they weren't in there legally and had bypassed many federal trespassing signs. They cut the lights and slowly but surely tried to walk unnoticed back to the entrance. Unfortunately, they went deeper and spent 17 hours in there before getting out. He didn't have many stories, because apparently you inch along in complete darkness without being able to see your hand in front of your face. But he said one of his friends kept saying, "We didn't survive that crap to die in here, story 11. There's an abandoned insane asylum in Northville, Michigan that my friends and I explored 3 times. This is the story of the 3rd and final time we ever broke in. I still get chills every time I remember this night. The first 2 times we went, the asylum was actually more interesting than creepy to explore. Both times we happened to run into very friendly people there. The first time we ran into another group of high school kids. Scared the crap out them at first. The second time we met a couple stoner Vietnam vets that gave us a tour of the place. It's an entire complex complete with underground tunnels, morgue, and lots of files and things from the 50s. This time, however, we were alone and only had 2 flashlights between 3 people. Much like the guy with the story about the W2 bass, the echoing footsteps sound like they're coming from behind you and always seem to take one more step after you stop. So, after exploring much of the asylum like this and being considerably creeped out already, we decide to head to the main building. It's about 18 stories tall, and the view from the top is pretty cool because it's by far the tallest building anywhere remotely close, and you can see Detroit from up there. Anyway, we're nearing the top of the seemingly endless stair corridor when the girl that's with us freezes and whispers for us to stop. "I heard footsteps," she whispers. I tried to tell her it was just footsteps echoing, but when both of them made me shut up and listen, I could hear it clear as day. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the top floor. Now the building is tall, but very small area-wise, so we were very close to the sounds. Still standing on the stairs, we whisper amongst us about what we're gonna do. My very stupid friend insists that it's probably just another friendly person and we should go up and say hi. I try to explain to him that you don't want to meet the kind of people that pace the top floor of an old asylum in the middle of the night. We couldn't convince him, and he goes to head up the stairs, but I was like, "Duck this," and just started running down the stairs. Fortunately, he followed us, and we got out of there without ever finding out who or what was walking around up there that night. To top it all off, a cop passing by on the road spotted us after coming out of the building, and we had to run into the asylum complex to get away. I still think back to that night sometimes and wonder who was up there. There were definitely no guards, so it was probably either a gang, there's gang graffiti all over the asylum for the guppies, or the tortured soul of a crazy person. Either way, that was way too close. Story 12. There used to be an abandoned rubber factory on the edge of my town before it was torn down a couple years back. I went there once and tried all the doors, but they were barred. But I did find a crack in the concrete wall around the back that was just big enough to slip through. The inside was really neat. There were abandoned boats that must have been in storage for decades there. A bunch of old conveyor belts and factory equipment, all kinds of paraphernalia. I found a random painting in a makeshift shrine. But that's not the creepy part. I was walking around this abandoned factory at about 8 p.m., just after dark. I look around for an hour or so, and aside from some old crap, there's really nothing out of the ordinary. Then I hear music start playing, something sort of blues-eye, somewhere in the factory. I'm not easily scared, and I kind of wanted to figure out what sort of freak was listening to old records in an abandoned factory, because that's something I would do. I tracked down the noise after about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's in this room in the basement that has the doorway covered with a tarp. I go inside, and the room is a huge contrast from the rest of the dingy, dull old factory. The walls were bright purple, and the room was warm like there was a space heater in it, whereas the rest of the factory was freezing. There's a cassette player on the floor playing a song, which I later tracked down to be called Eleanor Rigby by the Beatless, but I never found out what the other songs were. And a bunch of papers taped to the walls that all say, "She got to run, she got to run." If I were to guess, there were at least 100 sheets that said the exact same phrase, just plastered on the walls and laying on the floor. There was a chair that looked like it had been detached from a school desk in the corner, and a statue of an animal that was really badly chipped and burned, like someone was trying to destroy it. There was also a stack of VHS tapes that had the names of women on the sides. I only remember seeing Jessica on multiple, but there were a few other names. I left shortly after because I got worried whoever owned all this crap would come back and find me there, and I figured they were in the building with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it for a few weeks. I was convinced it was either a serial killer or some guy with an adult film collection that he couldn't risk having at home, or something worse on the tapes, and went back with a friend. But when we got there, they had already started demolishing the place, and it was inaccessible. I'll always wonder what was on those tapes, but part of me is glad I don't know. Story 13. Recently, I was visiting NYC and stayed in a hotel inside the city. It was a fairly nice place, but it was also a pretty old building that was not built with the intention of it getting so much use. For example, there were only 2 tiny elevators available for guests, and the hotel was at least 15 to 20 floors. The wait for elevators took so long that I decided I'd use the stairs. For some reason, there were 4 to 5 stairwells in the building, accessible from each floor, and most wound up in different parts of the lobby. I remembered using one of them the day before, and I thought it was stairwell D, so I took it. After descending for a while, I passed level 2. The next exit wasn't marked, but I thought it had to be level 1. I went through the exit door and found myself in an unfamiliar hallway with a very low ceiling. It could only have been about 7 feet, and sparse lighting. It wasn't eerie, but it definitely didn't look like it was intended for guests. Still, a little curious, I decided to check it out and see if I could find the lobby. I walked for a minute down a long hallway with a kind of dirty stone floor and some industrial double doors. There didn't seem to be anyone around, and it was pretty quiet. I rounded a corner, and to my immediate right was this big window set into the wall. Through it was a clean white room that reminded me a little of my high school's cafeteria. I remember thinking that, but I'm not sure exactly why. There was also a man, sitting and looking at his phone. He must have been about 5 feet away from me, and only the window separated us. He saw me and looked a little startled. I waved and was about to ask where the lobby was, but he quickly pointed for me to turn back. Neither of us ever said a word. It was just the weirdest experience, being in such a silent, dirty place and then seeing a modern room with a person. I speed walked out and took the elevator. In retrospect, I probably just stumbled into some storage area under the lobby. It definitely wasn't the same level, but it was the strangest discovery, and I like to imagine what could have gone on down there and why I wasn't allowed to be there. Story 14. There's an old, half-torn-down school on the airbase outside of my hometown. The supposedly haunted old grain silos about a quarter-mile away get more attention. But the school is what me and my friends were obsessed with. We had gone in during the day and poked around, finding the typical bullcrap graffiti teenagers make in places like that, like duck, with the anarchy symbol and all hail the Zodiac Killer, stupid crap like that. We wanted to go in at night, but didn't want to break our necks doing it, which ended up being a smart choice, since there were holes in the floor that went all the way down to the basement, which seemed to have about just above ankle-deep standing water at the time. We didn't get really freaked out until later, when we went back at night, and as we're psyching ourselves up to go in, some kind of early 90s blue Ford and a gun rack pulls into the empty parking lot. Its lights cut right through the car and made it hard to see much, but it spooked the hell out of us. We got the hell out of there, but the truck followed us around the airbase for the better part of half an hour, turning on its high beams and tailgating us, and then turning their lights off completely and acting like they were tailing us, in spite of it only being the 2 cars on the road at that hour, plus the airbase being abandoned. We're just glad we were still in the car and not inside when they got there. Story 15. Where I grew up, there were a few storm drains that all went to the same pond. My friend A and I were messing around in the woods near one of the openings, and we could hear this really sharp, echoing cry that made us both nervous. We thought it was the wind at first, and then I threw a rock into the opening and it stopped for a minute. So at this point, we figured it must be something alive. We climbed back out of the woods and went to the next pipe and could hear it there too. Now I'm scared, and A is trying to prove as how he's not afraid of anything, so on we go to the next one. This one is quieter, so we go back in the other direction. Now I'm being a baby because it's raining a little and I'm not supposed to get my clothes wet. I was around 9. So I'm begging it to go home. As he stops to assure me we are safe, we hear this horrible, deep wailing noise and I start to panic. I can feel my pulse in my neck and I'm sweating, and he puts his face into the opening for the drain. The noise happens again and takes off down the hill and into the pipe opening. I am now crying because they abandoned me in the rain and there's a monster in the pipes. Starts yelling my name, and I have to put my face to the opening to hear him. So now I'm really crying, and he tells me to call the fire department, so I run to the nearest neighbor and tell them to. I explain I don't know why we need to call, but that A is in the pipe outside their house. They get all snotty because A is the heaviest kid in the neighborhood, so they assume he got stuck. They call the non-emergency number and a truck comes to remove the cover. Turns out A recognized the sound of an angry cat and ran into the pipe. It was a mama cat and her kittens, but the kittens were stuck beneath the wire grate inside the drain, so the rain was drowning them, and they were crying. They got all but one kitten out and the mama cat in time before the rain got worse. He got to keep one of the kittens, and no one believed us, even though we were both there and there were firemen. No one believed he could fit into the pipe. Story 16. Many years ago, I worked as a technical assistant at a coal mining company. This was basically doing the grunt work for those with degrees, taking samples of things, doing data entry, driving the surveyors around, etc. When one of my duties was to go into the underground mines and take coal, dirt, and air samples on a regular basis. Often this would be a little away from other workers. One place I'd hate going because every time it'd feel and sound like there was someone standing just behind me to my left and whispering in my ear, even when the nearest other person was 30 yards away or so. Probably just weird acoustics, but duck, I hated those days. Story 17. Me and a few friends explored this abandoned quarry once. There was one main tunnel going back into a mountain with tons of straight offshoot tunnels and clearings intersecting it. We came to one of the cleared out areas far back into the mine. The entrance to the tunnel was out of sight with no light other than our spotlights. Laying on some rocks at the bottom of the flooded, partially caved-in clearing was one of those old TV that sit like a cabinet on the floor. At first, we thought it was some kind of chest or crate, but when we put a spotlight on it and realized it was an old TV, it was definitely unsettling. The whole quarry had a creepy vibe to it, but the TV was just really out of place. I guess some of the miners had it running off a generator or something back in the day. Creepy nonetheless. The creepy silhouette in the top corner is not a monster, it's just my friend's spotlight. Story 18. I do electrical work for a living, and I've been working in old Baltimore lately, and most of the buildings in Baltimore are connected by tunnels. So about a few months ago, I was working on a building on East Redwood Street, putting lights in the tunnels. Well, on my lunch break, I decided to walk around them. So I'm walking for about 20 minutes when I thought I heard my foreman call me down one of the halls. I assume he went to look around as well. So I start to walk down the hall, and it started to get deeper and colder. I think about turning around because I don't want to get lost when I hear it again, so I a little deeper. Eventually, I hit a room about the size of a baseball court with probably 20 feet high ceilings. The ground is all sticky, and every step I take sounds like I'm undoing a heavy Velcro strap. At this point, I'm freezing and really scared. I start to smell a harsh burning smell and hear what sounded like a big dog running on concrete. I can hear it get louder and closer, louder and closer. I start running like I have never ran in my life. Finally, after what felt like an hour of running at full sprint, I run into a staircase with a big, heavy metal door at the end of it. I hear the noises now like they are right around the corner. So with all my might and adrenaline-fueled strength, I rip the door open and slam it behind me, and then hear and feel a hard thud against the door. I turn around to see I'm standing under the docks by the Four Seasons and the Marriott Hotel. I call my boss and tell him I got lost in the tunnels and need to get picked up. Since the day I refused to go in the tunnels under Baltimore or go into sub-basements in Baltimore. Story 19. I'm an urban explorer, but nearly everything I've done was above ground. But there was an old farmhouse near me, now demolished, which I explored several times, including the basement. I'd say the times something unexplained happened were something like less than 5% of my expeditions, but I had several in this house. It had been abandoned for at least 30 years, was in very poor shape, and used to be a big party spot for teens. A friend can recall waking up on the lawn one morning, still drunk, surrounded by empty bottles. The basement had a bunch of the usual laughable want-to-be satanic tagging across one wall in red paint, and religious messages in black countering it on the opposite wall. The underground experience happened one night as 3 or 4 of us were walking up the staircase out of the basement. which had solid walls on both sides. As we did, each person in turn, from top down, got their shoulder bumped, as though a person were going down past us as we were going up. I might as well mention the non-underground ones too, in case someone asks. The second floor ceiling was damaged, but we did go up the attic stairs, and when shining a light towards the other end, we each saw what seemed to be a human face, and only a face, down there, not moving. The windows were all boarded over, but one on the second floor had the board nailed only at the top. It was bent open outward, the lower end held out by a chunk of wood. On one visit with some newbies, we looked up and saw that it was closed. The newbies thought the place looked to run down to be safe, and when they uncovered a statue among the weeds in the yard, elected to poke around there. When the rest of us got upstairs, the board was bent open as usual, and we looked out and saw the others in the yard, and I'm still kicking myself for not shouting down to them, because when we got back outside, it was shut again. Story 20. After the Community Care Act in Scotland in the early 90s, a lot of the big, sprawling, long-stay mental hospitals were closed down and all the patients moved into smaller houses and homes, etc., spread out through the community. A lot of these old sites are still standing, though. In Dundee, we have Strathmartine Hospital, the core of which was constructed in the 1800s and expanded. Back in the day, it was kind of place you'd be sent if you were an unwed mother or a bad child. The place was bought over to develop into flats, but the owner went bankrupt in the recession, so the whole site is standing there unprotected by security, albeit surrounded by fences and kind of difficult to get to. Me and a few friends have broken in a few times and it's creepy. Wards with beds and furniture perfectly preserved, old mass communal bathrooms, open loft shafts, meds rooms with health posters and medications still there, children's ward with child's pictures still on the wall decades later, mental health wards with seclusion areas, old crematoriums, gym and swimming pool. People don't realize these hospitals were entirely self-contained communities. On the children's ward, my friend who was filming, who's a bit of a spiritualist, said she felt a presence and got really anxious. I laughed it off, but when you play the video back, when she expresses that she feels something, the clip is all freakily distorted. Other story is, when we were in an L-shaped building, I swear on my life I heard whistling and footsteps coming around the corner. We quickly scrambled and hid, thinking security had found us, but no one was there. Story 21. Well, not unexplained as the explanation is, I am an idiot, but definitely scary. Houston is crisscrossed with bayous because it is a swamp that needs to be drained a lot. There are these gigantic tunnels that lead to the bayous and collect water from the storm drain. When we were kids, these were great to explore. We'd make maps about how to get from one area to another using these tunnels. Well, we set aside one Saturday to try to make all the way to a mall a couple miles away from the starting point. Our hand-drawn map was about halfway done. We got lost. And then, as it is wont to do in Houston in the summer, it started pouring down rain. This happened before, but we were usually close to an exit. Not this time. It kept raining. The water got high enough that the current knocked us over. Eventually, we got spit out into a bayou from a tunnel we had never even explored. After finally getting out of the bayou and getting back to safety, we realized we were almost a mile from where we started. Story 22. I do know a few people who have experienced this whilst in the mine. I've been down to the Echo Churn myself too, with a group, and it's not a place you'd ever be making a quick escape from if you did hear something. Here's an excerpt from the Forest of Dean Caving Club newsletter, which includes the full dark history of the mine. The story of the Westbury Brook Mine does not end there, fortunately. Members of the Royal Forest of Dean Caving Club reopened the mine for exploration in 1970. This period of exploration was initially undertaken by members who kept their exploration secret for a period of time. They were at the bottom of a large chamber, or churn, looking at the blocked level number 1, when club members Roger and Lawrence Bailey both suddenly heard someone shout, "Hello!" which startled them both, as they knew that no one else had been informed of their discovery. Immediate investigation in the direction of the distinct shout showed that there was no one there. The large chamber was subsequently called Echo Churn. In 1990, the author, along with 2 other cavers, Howard Roberts and Rob Smith, heard voices talking when at the top of this churn. Being curious and also thinking it was fellow cavers, they decided to find out to whom the voices belonged to. However, there was no one there, and there was no place where anyone could hide in that area. It was a while later, whilst the later story was recounted to the Bailey brothers, who then retold their experiences in the same place. Story 23. When exploring with a bunch of friends at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. While this is not underground in its entirety, portions of it are. The buildings were left with hospital equipment, beds, books, patient files, literally everything. It's eerie, as if a zombie apocalypse occurred and everyone left. It operated from 1864 to 1994. The facility was self-sustaining. That is, the patients farmed the land and had all resources on campus. The years this was open, a lot of horror stories came out of this place. This wasn't the modern-day psychiatric ward, more like a prison, where families paid a lot of money to hide their mentally ill, or the state put undesirables. There's an underground network that was heavily blocked off with chains. However, the main buildings were easily accessible, but the access ways to the underground were blocked off inside as well. Every time we got near one of the underground tunnel systems, we could hear faint music playing. Sounded like a music box playing. We found a bent wired gate and attempted to file in. The music got louder and we were all pretty freaked out. We were all promptly arrested before attempting to go into the tunnels. There's a lot of speculation about the tunnels still to this day. The new owner said he was afraid of asbestos and was fearing for our safety. He was very grim. He agreed to drop charges if we never went back. We obliged happily. Still, I sometimes think of my interactions there, all of the remnants left behind, and get severely creeped out. Story 24. So I've done a lot of things like this, and there's usually an explanation for anything that seems untoward. Disused mental hospitals, train tunnels, sewers, abandoned stations, utility tunnels, military installations, the lot. It's usually just your mind if you think something is weird. One story that springs to mind was being in a storm drain in London. The storm drains are generally dry, but there might be water elsewhere. The tunnels can stretch for miles at a time. We would always listen out for moving water and any changes in air pressure or temperature, just to know whether there was going to be any change in water level or something dumped into the tunnel further up the line. I was in this sewer and there was a massive gust of wind. No idea what caused it, but the chap I was with looked at me and we both just said, "We're leaving right now." We stomped up the tunnel and made our way out into a dry night. Something in that change of air pressure and temperature told us something, and I'm not sure what it was, but we both knew that leaving there and then was the right thing to do. Story 25. I'm not sure I qualify since the explanation seems rather straightforward to me. Another group of explorers. Still, I have a pretty good story. I attended the University of Huddersfield, and one of the accommodation facilities for students is called Strophes Hall. Strophes Hall was previously a psychiatric hospital, an asylum. Most of the buildings were demolished. I believe 2 are currently in use to house students, and then off-site, there's the main building and the mortuary. The main building was off limits, and I believe security guards were in place. But when you have several hundred drunk students living nearby, you're basically just grabbing sand. I went with a group of people, and we intended to have some kind of day seance. Darren Brown had done his not long before. So we toddled off with tarot cards and a Ouija board. It was all pretty funny, to be honest. None of us really took it seriously. And having seen the Darren Brown seance, I was really skeptical. Then the torch died, and we heard several loud knocks. We ducked off sharpish. But again, it likely was somebody ducking with us, after hearing the panic caused by the torch going out. Might have even been the security guards. I wouldn't blame them. Story 26. I've popped hundreds of manhole covers in Boston working for DigSafe. The only thing I can think of is surprise bee nests, of when the noxious gas meter starts beeping, which means stay duck out of this hole or you'll pass out and die. Story 27. As a kid, a friend's sister fell down a storm drain while trying to retrieve a ball, and when she got fished out by her dad, it looked like she'd been bitten by a rat. She had to get the infamous rabies shots, rumored to be 20, directly into the stomach with a long needle. Not sure if that was true at this point. However, a Saturday of going down to the creek to play would often involve exploring drainage pipes. We'd watch for storms to make sure we wouldn't get flooded out and die, so it was a bit scary and a bit fun, and sometimes we'd find little rooms that were outlets with metal ladders embedded in the side. But it was super easy to get scratched up on the concrete, and just as easy on Monday morning to imagine you'd been bitten by a rabid rat and had days to live before the symptoms manifested, and you'd go insane and die horribly. But you couldn't tell your parents you'd been somewhere off limits. Oh no, I guess I should include something unexplained. Any toy or rock or anything we left in the drains seemed to move, even if it hadn't rained lately. I'd like to think some raccoons were having fun down there at night just like we were in the day. Story 28. I feel like I should contribute. Walking along the track one evening doing an inspection. It was in a station, kind of crowded and lots of people watching me work because people are naturally nosy, especially when someone is walking on the track that their train is coming on. So I'm walking along and I see a rat run across the track about 10 feet in front of me. I know a rat's in the area. Now I know to not be startled when I see it again in a minute. I keep walking and go to step over a pile of garbage. See the first rat out the corner of my eye, plus a bonus dead rat in the garbage pile. As I'm stepping over the garbage, what I thought was a dead rat ran in between my feet and scared the duck out of me. This story isn't what you're looking for in terms of scary or creepy, but it duck and hate rats. Story 29, went with my family to a used bookstore in Utah, like a real legit used bookstore with a vault for priceless manuscripts. Anyway, there were stairs down to a basement floor with more of the old nonfiction stuff and record books and stuff like that. The creepy part was that half of the basement floor was unlit. So my brother and I are snooping around the bottom floor, and we find an open door over on the unlit half of the floor. It's just bright enough to see some empty shelves on the opposite wall through the door. We poke our heads in, and it is so dark we can't see either end of the room. It looks like an endless hallway. Some distance away, we see a blinking red light, and we nope the hell out of there and dash back upstairs. It was probably a security camera or fire alarm or some crap, but it was still scary because I get the feeling it only started blinking once we poked our heads in. Story 30, I remember having an experience once while not in break rules, take pics mode. I was just riding on my local subway, underground slow train basically. It got even slower because of a bend in the tracks. I always loved this area to look out of the windows because it was super old and super big, spanning out into like an industrial cave. If you knew the angles to look, they tried to make it look all posh and hidden, and it's almost impossible to get down into there without tripping one of the 15 security systems. I suppose homeless could probably figure it out. Usually the most exciting thing I saw was a construction vehicle. This day I saw a person hopefully just sleeping in a little cubby. I thought I was the only one to know about. Threw me off balance a little bit. I almost reported it, but decided if I was in that situation and alive, I wouldn't want someone to report me, and if I was dead, I wouldn't care, so decided not to. Story 31. I was in a house that the police confiscated from a biker gang. My job was to assess the damage for an insurance company. The walls were all painted white, and the floor was sheets of plywood painted dark red. I was going around measuring each room, opening doors, no problem. I then opened the linen closet, and it had deep scratch marks on the inside and dents on the back of the door, like someone was trying to escape. The freaky part was straight ahead at my head level was a round red splatter pattern on the back wall that had been painted over with a coat of white paint. Freaked me the duck out. Story 32. Explored an abandoned factory? I'm not sure what it was. Extremely sketchy. In the middle of the floor, there was a square cutout and just a dark room below it with no light source, around an 8 to 10 foot drop. Would have been ducked if someone fell down. Also, many children toys and random musty books. Tons of bat and pigeon crap, and it went up about 4 to 5 stories. Stairs were very sketchy. Story 33. I'll put my crap in with the rest of the pile. It wasn't really exploring, but one time the librarian at my old high school, literally old, because the place was about 100 years old, asked me and 2 other friends if we could stack some boxes at the library attic so they wouldn't be a fire hazard. We went up and it was a treasure trove, or cool stuff like rare antique books and 100-year-old newspapers. I thought it was really cool. Also, even though the library is only 1 floor, there was a rumor that it had a basement level where they kept all the rarer antique books. I never asked her if it was true because I ended getting on her bad side a while later. Story 34. I was walking through the woods with some of my friends at about midnight, having fun and messing around. It was pretty much pitch black in some areas, usually taking about a minute to get to the next light section. And at some point I felt somebody hold my hand. It was very clearly a small and definitely female hand. After about a minute, we finally got close to the light again, and I asked if she was all right, only to look over and notice that everybody else was about 2 meters behind me, and the only female was at the very back of the group. Almost immediately, I felt the pressure leave my hand. I never brought it up with them because they'd probably just tell me I was imagining things. Story 35. So not exactly unexplained, but I grew up in a New England town littered with old mill buildings. One night in high school, a friend and I decided to go explore an abandoned mill. Once there, we explored what was a completely run-down mill, attached to an apartment building, both of which had been condemned due to a fire years earlier. We stopped in a small room in the mill part to find a case of makeup and a book about Kurt Cobain. Weird. We then thought we heard footsteps outside the room and immediately turned our flashlights off. I'll never forget the feeling of thinking I was going to die. I don't know what it was. I was just sure that my life was about to end. Anyway, the sound was just drops of water from inside the building, but I will never forget that feeling. Story 36, not me and not a subway, but it was under. Dad worked in the military in a submarine during the Gulf War. He used to send me pics of him in the engine room, which was a really cramped space and often leaky or greasy due to the machines. He said cabin fever gets to a lot of the new recruits. He did tell me on days they surface him and a few select crew can go up and fish, which was pretty cool. Too bad he only did 2 tours of this. Story 37. As a teen, I was into urban exploration. There was an old ice plant near my house that had burned, I know, ironic, around 25 to 30 years prior. Anyway, it wasn't really underground, but was so overgrown that it felt more or less like it. I go climbing around over and under mangled concrete and rebar and graffiti for a while, and finally decide I'm done. A couple of days later, I hear about how the police pulled a corpse out of there. Pretty sure I walked right by it and didn't even notice. Story 38. There's a sewer system under my old neighborhood, and I would go in there to smoke with my buddies. We started to notice messages left on the walls in red paint, like, "We're watching you. Smoke the reefer, meet the reaper." One day while we were down there, we heard a couple of voices laughing and were getting closer and closer. We panicked and lifted a manhole right above that opened up to a busy road street. We never went back down again. Story 39. At a hotel in my hometown that everyone breaks into. It's the most famous building in our town, and our downtown is super run down. Anyway, me and my two friends crawl through the basement from a side entrance, and initially, all we see is spray paint graffiti. But as we make our way up some really steep steps, we see a bunch of dead cats that have been dragged around and left bloodstains on the ground. We pretty much booked it the duck out of there after that. We're probably going back in a couple of weeks, and that crap better still be there. Story 40. This sketchy-ass tunnel I found when I was working for a fire inspection company the past few summers. We inspect all the schools in our district. I discovered during an inspection at my old public school, one of the oldest in Canada, in the basement, a tunnel. A tunnel that went on for at least 100 meters, and it very well may have gone on longer. But I had this horrible vibe about being where I was. I couldn't bring myself to walk further. Finally turned back to where I came from, and it was at least 75 meters away. I immediately booked it the duck back, never to return again. Story 41. Explorer here. I live in a small town, and a few miles south of town is an abandoned house. My cousin and I decided to check it out. This house looked like an attic den from the outside, and it had tons of overgrowth and was dilapidated as all hell. Inside, there was a kitchen directly to the left with really nasty dishes inside. To the right was a living space with the first floor crashing into. A bit in front were stairs. We climbed them, and at the top there were tons of stuffed animals and a sleeping bag with some amenities scattered around. That freaked us out, and we dipped out accordingly. Story 42. I visited San Francisco a few years back, and we took a little hike to Bird Island and the Point Bonita Lighthouse. Not too far into the hike, probably closer to the road area, I noticed what looked like a bunker of some kind. IRC, it was on the top of a hill. I was able to look down inside the bunker, and I saw what looked like some big rusty object. I don't know if it was a bomb, an old piece of machinery, or what. Whatever it was, it still intrigues me to this day. The whole city of San Francisco is so rich in history and creepy stuff. Story 43. I once found the basement door on the unused but open basement level, at University Open, and followed the hallway for maybe a mile or so. Near the end, I felt a sudden cold, was spooked until I remembered the stream that runs across the grounds. Story 44. Another more relevant story for the subways. The amount of shoes and pants you see on the tracks is astounding to me. Who is losing these article of clothing on the train? There are enough shoes and pieces of clothing I use as a personal survey marker to determine locations of flagging lamps by the single moccasin or leather boot, the pair of jeans or sparkly wallet on the ground or bench wall. Story 45. An abandoned mental hospital that I went to first time, the freezer, which at one point they put there dead when they first opened up, like in the 1800s, was full of mold. Next time I went, it was spotless. Then in one hallway, blood that I tested was written really big and had a written in spray paint small under it. Next time I went, the blood was gone, but the high was still there and looked the same as before. Subway drivers have read it. What was the strangest thing you saw in the tunnels? Story 1. I've been riding the subway and the commuter rail trains in Massachusetts for 30 years. Been on about 5 trains that have hit people. Seen a crazy woman chasing an innocent female passenger, and the go-on to kick the crap out of a male subway inspector who intervened. One of my favorites was the guy who fell asleep standing up, leaning forward against the doors. The train stopped, doors opened, and he just slowly fell forward like a tree falling in the woods. Never put his hands down. Slap, right onto the platform. Turned over like, "Hey, who woke me up and how did it get down here?" Expression on his face. Story 2. Not subway, but London's Docklands Light Railway. They used to have a shutdown every August bank holiday. It gave 3 clear days where major works and repairs could be undertaken from the Saturday morning through to the Tuesday morning. We were putting new equipment trackside, and on the Saturday morning, we were walking along the track, measuring distances, etc., ready to do the install of equipment on the Sunday and Monday. As we were walking, we noticed a woman laid across the tracks with her head on one rail and her feet on the other. Of note is that the DLR has a 500-volt DC third rail, which of course was off due to the shutdown. Also, the trains are automatic and have no driver most of the time. We walked towards the woman, who had seen us but didn't do anything. When we were close, and we asked her what she was doing and told her she couldn't be here. It's illegal to trespass on the railway in the UK. Thea turned her head and said, "I've had enough. Next train coming is going to end it for me." I said, "Well, you're going to have to wait until Tuesday, love. There's no trains this weekend." She got up and stormed off, complaining about bloody train. Story 3. There was a bathtub. An old-fashioned bathtub with feet on the bottom, with these 3 homeless-looking guys sitting in it. It looked like they were washing each other's backs, and as we drove past, I could faintly hear, "Scrub-a-dub, 3 men in a tub." Story 4. I was in Korea. A Canadian who was drunk got into an argument with his Korean girlfriend. Long story short, they had issues, but he decided he would strip down naked. This embarrassed her quite a bit. I was watching in complete enjoyment because this crap was awesome. At one stop, to further reinforce his belief that he's naked, he decided to throw all of his clothes out of the stop. This was even funnier. At the next step, the Korean police detained him. He was upset because he felt his girlfriend was cheating on him with a Korean guy. And his argument was that he had a bigger junk than the Korean guy. Not sure how him taking off his clothes made his argument any stronger, nor how throwing his clothes out of the train helped his cause either, but I thought it was hilarious. Oh, and he wasn't aggressive to the girl, more like passionate pleas of love, butt-ass naked, on a subway train. I did record it, but this was like 5 or 6 years ago and several phones ago, and my friends advised due to Korean libel laws, I should most likely not publish it, so I never saved it. Story 5. I used to work on the LRT lines as night shift snow removal. Sometimes would involve clearing some of the underground tunnels. We were always surrounded by homeless and addicts during our shift, so it's completely normal to see some ducked up stuff. We were entering the tunnel with our backpack snowblowers, and as we approached, a guy with no shirt came running from around the corner. He made it out the tunnel before we got there, but we saw him run out. Must have heard our equipment. Likely smoking crack or meth from the looks of him. That was like the least interesting day I had. Story 6. It was Saturday and I was taking the commuter train home from Stockholm Central. It was a 20-minute ride and I noticed this lady sitting down in the next section facing me. She stood out because she wore a fancy hat with big feathers and an expensive-looking fur coat. There were a lot of free seats at this point, so she had a small white paper bag on the seat beside her. As the train passed a few stops, it was starting to fill up with people, and a huge blue-collar guy from some East European country sees the free seat next to the feather lady and sits down on her paper bag with a tired sigh. Feather lady looses it and loudly accuses the man of destroying her cake, although the small bag couldn't possibly contain more than a medium-sized cookie. The man calmly responds that he just sat down at a free seat. He doesn't give a crap. By the looks of it, he has had a long day and just wants to go home. Feather lady is a fish out of water on the train, and she's getting more and more upset. She starts berating the man, and he doesn't really respond with more than the occasional annoyed look. This triggers her. She shouts and starts taking pictures of the man with her phone, exclaiming she will report the man to the police and that they will come take him away. By now, she has the attention of most of the passages that follow the unfolding drama in a true Swedish manner by pretending not to look while doing exactly that. The train passes a few stations and more seats are available. As Feather Lady doesn't get a response beyond a tired, "Stop photographing me," she moves to the seat facing the man and tells him she will call the police. And she does. She calls 112 and explains that a man has been threatening her and destroying her cake, and demands that they send a car to arrest him at the next station. The man goes from calm to worried. He is clearly not of high social standing, and she is, so he probably thinks the cops will believe Feather Lady's story. Feather Lady is told to call train security instead, and she does, telling the same story, only a more exaggerated version. By this point, the remaining passengers are passing around a piece of paper, writing their names and phone numbers, and someone gives it to the man and tells him that if this becomes a legal matter, he has a lot of witnesses on his side. Feather Lady realizes she's outnumbered and decides she needs to win the crowd, so she stands up and starts pleading her case for unsympathetic ears. This is my stop, but I decide to keep going to see what happens. A man with temped-up glasses looks up from his shark fin phone and tells Feather Lady it's illegal to take someone's photo without their consent, but she ignores him and keeps preaching. At the next station, 2 security guards come on board. After a brief discussion, they escort Feather Lady off the train. Applauds. Story 7. Former subway rider here. I rode the subway for about a year and a half when I lived in the city about 10 years ago. Here are a few highlights. A homeless dude setting up a literal camp inside a car of a subway train. Tent, sleeping bag, hot plate, the whole package. Someone smashing bottles into the side of the subway car from the inside. A teenage girl eating an entire watermelon-sized Ziploc bag of boiled eggs in a 20-minute period. Story 8. Not a subway worker, but rider. I once saw a guy clean his shoes with a dead fish. He just rubbed a dead fish all over his shoes, making them shine with goo. I don't know what he was going for, but he looked quite satisfied when he put them back on his feet. Story 9. My wife has interesting stories from her time commuting on the trains in Tokyo. One time she fell asleep on the train after a long day at work and was about to miss her stop. But some random stranger tapped her on her shoulder and said, "Hey miss, wake up, it's your station." She was half asleep and already off the train when she realized how stalker-ish that was. Another time, some teenage girl started to pluck hair strands from my wife's hair. And when my wife confronted her about it, the girl simply replied, "Okay, if you don't like it, then I'll stop." No apology or anything. Story 10. Not a worker, but was on the 10 p.m. bound train to Penn Station on my way to work at Bethpage, Long Island Railroad. Oh, and this was on the night after my car engine blew and was in the shop for replacement. So I get on at my local stop, and so does this dumb drunk guy. At the time, I thought nothing of it. He then goes to the bathroom, and when we stop at the next stop, he's still in there. But as he exits, the train doors are already closed for departure, and we proceed to move. And what does this guy do next? He proceeds to pull the emergency brake valve because he missed his stop. A ticket man comes, and he gets in trouble but tries to explain himself, and after that he apologizes to everyone in the car. I'm in, we then proceed to move toward Bethpage, and when we stop, both me and the drunk guy gets off the train. After the train leaves the station, I wait for my Uber to work, and the drunk guy comes up to me and offers me a smoke. I don't smoke cigarettes. We talk a bit, and he asks when the next train comes to go back to his stop. I tell him in about 5 minutes, and as my Uber arrives, I see the drunk guy jump down from the platform onto the tracks. Keep in mind that the tracks are third rail, and proceed to cross to the other platform, all without getting fried. But here's the problem. The platforms are higher than the tracks are, so in order to cross to the other side at Bethpage, you have to travel all the way down to where the crossing gates are and cross. But this guy asks for help to get up, where there were 2 sober people nearby, and as I was about to turn to my Uber, I saw the train lights coming toward Bethpage. After I left the station, I basically don't know if the guy made it up or got struck. But then again, I would have heard the news reports saying drunk man struck by train, and I probably would have been questioned by police, as there are CCTV cameras all around the station near the light poles, so I'm assuming the guy made it. That's all I have for now, apart from your average stories of New York City subway fights, which are common sometimes. If I have another story, I'll share.